Welcome to Construction One-on-One with Ravi, Bhatia. We've got Dan Donnelly here today to talk about things that really matter to us as construction professionals, as entrepreneurs, as business people, and more importantly, as human beings. Dan, thank you so much for joining us.
Ravi, thank you for having me. It's my honor.
Dan, your accomplishments in our industry are well documented, but to hear your story directly, it really means a lot, and it means so much because knowing that where you came from, and we can all relate to it. You know, growing up in New York, growing up at an exciting time, the 70s and 80s, and then starting your own business, and then setting a benchmark. For all of us, trailblazing in areas, mechanical contracting, mechanical service, HVAC, and being integral to the construction industry in New York City. Talk about some of your roots, your upbringing, how you came up in Queens, and what led to you, being the founder and head of a very successful business in construction.
Well, thank you, Ravi. So I grew up in Queens at a magical time. We were still playing out in the streets. There were no iPhones. There were no distractions. We played basketball. We played baseball. We had the run of the lot back in Queens. Bound Park was our Memorial Field, were our stomping grounds. And we got to play a lot of sports and grow up seeing where we stacked up against other people. My mom and dad, middle class. I'm the oldest of 5 kids. The benefit of a Catholic school education at St. Mel's. Couldn't have asked for a better time. And basically that was the breeding ground for watching people work. We were in a middle class neighborhood. Most of the mothers were at-home mothers at the time, but the parents were firefighters, police. My neighbor right around the corner was the legendary Chief Fian, who was also my baseball coach at one time. And it was one of those areas where you got a chance to meet everybody. You knew them by their first name, whether they were really important or they weren't. Everybody treated everybody with dignity and respect. Back then, Queens was mostly Irish Italian, but we had sprinkling of every ethnicity. I graduated St. Mel's, and my mother felt it best if I went to France Lewis High School during the first year of busing, and that was very interesting.
What year was that?
Oh, you're taking me back. I'm 67, so it's a long time ago.
Oh, so you guys were competition. I went to Newtown, so we were baseball competitors.
Exactly. It was a great opportunity, but the first 2 years of busing at France Lewis High School were quite challenging for everybody involved. Let's leave it at that. But learned to get really street smart and very fast, very quickly. And I would say my father had a belief system that said, I want to see you work. So we always had jobs. In high school, I had 2 jobs while I was going to school and trying to fit in sports. But my dad was a big believer in you got to support yourself. You got to learn how to work. You got to learn what the value of a dollar is. And, some of my greatest stories, Ravi, as early as 8, I was making money, and I would take that money after I was doing my newspaper route and go to Flushing Savings Bank on Northern Boulevard. You remember that? And then I'd pull out my passbook and put my money in the bank, and the people at the bank would look like me. I'm from Mars. And then I would take $5 and go across the street and buy a chocolate milkshake and a French fries, and I was into heaven. And to me, the value of the money was not spending it, but watching the passbook grow and holding on to money. So the biggest gift my father gave me was, okay, I like to work, but I really like what work does, and you can accumulate money and then watch the money grow. And to me, that was just fascinating at a very young age to have money in the bank.
You know, that's not typical because most kids, they want to buy the candy and you want to spend, well, also adults, right? You want to spend the money, right?
Yeah, I really enjoyed looking at it. I can't say that I had the value of money back then, but I liked the idea that every week I could grow by $50 or $25 or whatever that was. And I didn't really need a lot of money to live because back then we were taking the Q76 to Francis High School. Everything was paid. So it wasn't a big deal, but I had a great, great childhood. I wouldn't change a thing. Great parents, great neighbors, great friends. Um, some of those friends we still play golf with down here behind me in my new place in the South Carolina. And it was just a magical time. It I can't say that I would have done anything different because it was perfect just the way it was.
Yeah, and it was not easy, right? Growing up in Queens, Flushing, College Point, we've got a lot of common roots there, you know, and I think so much of it is influenced by family, and you know, I think our fathers are alike, you know, in that, you know, my toughest lesson was my first summer job as a draftsman, and I made pretty good money. I worked my ass off, and I made like I think $3,000. And at the end of the summer, my father goes, "Give me your money." I said, "What do you mean, give me your money?" He said, "Yeah, this is gonna help. This is gonna pay for your tuition for this semester."
I
That
love
was a
that.
good lesson because it also made me feel good that I was contributing to my own education.
Right.
That it wasn't all going to be on my father, who at various times early in his career worked two jobs and you know, being in construction, you know, survival, and but good people.
Right. So it's funny you mentioned about um, the design. So back then, you and I were both doing the same thing. We were grabbing our T square and our triangles and drawing different things. And one of my great lessons in life, and you don't know it until you don't know it. It's sort of like being colorblind. You don't know you're colorblind until somebody tests you for it. But at a very early age, my first job when I was designing, the owner of the company said to me, he says, "How well do you see three-dimensionally?"
Wow.
And I said, "Wow, I think I see pretty good." And he had his own elaborate test for people that could really see three-dimensionally and people that faked it two-dimensionally and tried to do it. And it was a really, really big point in my career when I was able to see the whole field, not just the mechanical drawings, the electrical drawings, the structural drawings, the architectural drawings,
You could picture it, right?
and you
Like,
could see it. And in
wow.
my world, Ravi, if you could see it, you could build it. But if you couldn't see it, then you're just looking at paper. And back then, we took rolls of drawings to jobs. We had plan racks. I mean, when I think about it, it feels like it was 100 years ago.
Yeah.
But but those were great days.
Yeah, and I remember in those days, and I think that we definitely met in a previous life because when I was at Structureton, we worked with Donnelly Mechanical. I
Yep,
remember
yep.
working with
Great
Donnelly
client.
Mechanical, and I remember one of my first sort of memories of that is that when we did coordination drawings, it would always be at the sheet metal shop or the mechanical contractor because there, you know, you had to lay out the ductwork, and it was order of precedence, and then you would have a war room meeting and people fighting about where the light fixture goes. Or, well, I can't move this ductwork because it's an immovable object, and you know the air's got to go somewhere, and you know you can move the light fixture around a little bit, but so those kind of those conflicts, and of course today we've got BIM technology and all that, but back then it was a human coordination.
Well, it's funny you say that because my favorite part of the job, so I'm Irish Catholic, which means I like pain, guilt, and suffering. So I applied that to my life, and I wanted to get all the pain out of the way early. So those coordination meetings, it's funny you say that it was always at the sheet metal shop. And the reason it was always at our sheet metal shop was because, we were the biggest stuff and we had to get in first. But back then, when we were doing our own piping, I was right next to the sheet metal guy and laying out the sheet metal. And God help the poor electrician because
Oh,
they didn't really have draftsmen back then. They had a guy that was a local 3 guy that couldn't work anymore, and it was just a mess. And we got to a point where I said to the electrical contract, and we were working a lot at that time with a bunch of different ones. But I said, listen, it's the same as pipe. Let me just leave you runways, and then you can do what you have to do. Little did I know that 60 years later, I'd have a design company doing the same thing. But back then, what I liked about that process, Ravi, was you got a chance to see how the job was going to go with the personalities, with the teams. If you had a bad subcontractor, you knew it right in the coordination stage. And then you could ring the bell and then light a fire under that guy and do it. We had my biggest issue back then was the sprinkler guys would never involve themselves in the coordination process because they said, listen, you don't worry about what you do. We're below you. We'll get in, blah, blah, blah. And it was always a problem. And as we started getting better and better at coordination, communication actually was the tool that got us there. And the jobs that really went well is all, you remember the days where you had 3 days to get your drawings done and you sent them to this place and then you sent them to that place. And then we all met in a room and we looked at a couple of flags.
Different color on the Mylar.
Exactly.
Different colors.
And because I'm Irish, I was always green, right?
Green and red, and then yes, the sprinkler, and just some of those meetings got kind of heated, I think.
Oh yeah, but see,
yelling and screaming.
Exactly, but back then, you get the pain out of the way, and once it's coordinated, everyone is doing what they have to do. And back then, Ravi, the other big deal, and I hate to sound like I'm really, really old, even though I am, but back then, those superintendents were 40 years superintendents. They had seen it all.
Oh, they've seen it all, yeah.
Some of these guys had built buildings, and I'm not taking anything away from the guys that are doing it now, but these guys knew every part of a job. I remember one meeting, I had watched a super, it was the name of the company was W.J. Barney. They're not in business anymore. But this guy was a top superintendent. We were doing a mission critical hospital, and one of the subs came to a coordination meeting unprepared. And he literally, it was like a scene from A Few Good Men. He basically said to that person, how dare you come into my meeting unprepared? You are removed from this project. You will never be allowed back in this project again.
Oh my God.
And once you saw that, once you saw that in the first 3 weeks of a project, you knew that you had to have your stuff buttoned up. And the project went very well. This guy was fantastic. Probably one of the greatest experiences for me to see a real working superintendent who knew everything. He knew the design part. He knew the coordination part. He knew quality control. He knew manpower. It was just a very exciting time. And it was lessons through men like that I got a chance to say, okay, wait a second. If you know the right way to build, then let's build the right way. And I followed that model, and I tried to take that model to my 30 years at Donnelly Mechanical.
Wow. And you started out, you worked for a mechanical company, a well-known.
I worked for a great company.
Yeah.
Ravi, I worked for
I think I did some work with them on projects. A.D. Winston, right?
A.D. Winston. So A.D. Winston, unfortunately, they just went bankrupt a couple of months ago, as probably because of what the economy is doing to some of these large commercial contractors. But I had the greatest opportunity there because I was the only project manager and the only service manager, and I had to do it all, and there was nobody after me. So it was one of those situations where they trusted me that I'd make the right decision, which I didn't always all the time. I'm 22 years old, but I was able to run these large projects and run a service company and figure it out along the way.
You were a kid. You were in your 20s. Running a mechanical company. Like you didn't know any better.
Didn't know any better. And all the mistakes. But the thing that I'm most grateful for these days is when I look back at those times, all the patience of these great men and women that worked for me, that realized that I was, if I said I was going to do it, I did it. But this is the first time I'm ever doing it. And it was just a different time. And I look back at those days of great men and great women that I worked for.
Just incredible experiences.
Really was.
They also gave a kid a chance to, try stuff, fail, That's
Yep.
how you learn, right? Because you got to make some mistakes, right?
So
Along
Ravi,
the way.
to that point, you know, one of my big things now that I'm very, very involved with, is still involved in. And back then, it was not uncommon for the owner of a construction company to pull the project manager, a guy like me, aside and talk to me or have a cup of coffee with me. The world wasn't as crazy as it is now.
Oh
So
yeah.
I had a dozen mentors of guys that would coach me and say, "Hey Dan, you made a mistake here. You were behind schedule, but you did this. You could have done this." And I was open to feedback. And I would say to anybody listening to this that if there's a couple of things you can take away from this conversation, is to identify mentors, people that will take 5 minutes or 10 minutes with you or do a one-on-one with you and coach you around different things. And I mean mentors, everyone wants to tell a story, their story. They're proud of their company or their job.
It's so
So
important. Yeah,
it
it's so
really is.
important. It's so
And
important to have people guide you. And some of the memories that I have, and I remember working as a junior project manager and at Structure Tone, and we were doing a big hotel project, the Sheraton on 7th Avenue, and I was in charge of the one night I was in charge of the telecom cutover, right? So it's an all-nighter, and Sheraton is they're moving furniture in, right? So I think the bowl team is covered, right? Because you got the bowl team running the elevator, so the hoist. And so the next day, um, my boss, who was the project executive, Phil, he walks into my office, screams at me, and he gives me a bill for $5,000, and he goes, "We're gonna end up eating this." I said, "What happened? We were covered." He goes, "No, you didn't check. Sheraton did not schedule furniture delivery last night. We're gonna eat this." And I felt like just crushed. Then, as he's walking out, he pops his head back in and he says, "I bet you'll never do that again." And then, it wasn't personal. It was just like he taught me a lesson that stayed with me forever. And that's a great leader and a great mentor.
sounds like it.
And these are the lessons you learned, being unprepared for a meeting. That happened to me, and coming in and the client taking me aside for a beer and say, "Hey, listen, you were unprepared today, but it's not going to happen again, and I'll show you what you can do." And you need that when you're a young person. And today, I
Right,
think things are going so fast, and it's just a more complicated world. You got social media, you got all this technology, and we lose touch with the human element sometimes.
right. I agree.
Yeah, and those relationships are really important. There was a great book that was written in the 80s called Megatrends. And this guy who wrote it, Michael Naisbitt, I think, he made a point, and this guy like almost predicted the future. He said there's going to be a lot of technology, a lot of automation, a lot of computerization, but the more technology you have, the more you've got to realize the importance of human relationships.
No, no truer words have been spoken.
And sadly we live in a very litigious time right now. And there was a time, as you point out in your various podcasts, that you got a handshake from somebody, and that meant something. You didn't
Right.
even need a contract, right? So talk about that. When you went and you had the good fortune to work for Leslie Wexner, um, iconic American leader, and you didn't add nothing. You just said, "Yes, sir, I'll work for you." How did that work?
So I was very fortunate to build Les's townhomes in Manhattan, and Les taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. And he said, Dan, it's all about managing expectations. You have to manage my expectations. I have to manage my staff's expectations. So he says, let me show you how to do this. He says, here's my expectations, Dan. I want the air conditioning at 68 degrees. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to see it. And I really don't want to feel it. I want it to be 68 degrees. I don't want there to be drafts. I do not want there to be light in my bedroom. I want my bedroom dark. Then he would go on to say that it's in 68 degrees with total darkness and the absence of sound that gets him to sleep, which is the way I sleep for the last 30 years. So what he did was he taught me the most valuable tool was managing the other person's expectations. So if I'm doing a contract for you, I'm asking you, what is it that you want and how do you want it delivered? Some people's expectations are communication style, some are a completion date, some are pricing, whatever that was. So what I would do very early on with people like Les, and I must have worked for about a dozen billionaires, and these men were amazing people, and Les's tools gave me the ability to work with them. And I would ask them what they want, how they want it, how will they measure success? Are there any deal breakers? Are there any red flags? And they would tell me up front in our first meeting, because you only got one shot to do this. And then once you understood, I would report to them. Some would want a weekly update, some would want a monthly update, some would want no update and just the deliverables. But the most important lesson I learned from Les was to treat everybody with kindness and to manage everybody's expectations, from the people that you report to and to the people that report to you. So in my days with Donnelly Mechanical, people that worked for me always knew what the expectations were. There was no big surprise. And when we did our one-on-ones, which I think is the greatest tool in the world, whether you're meeting with somebody once a month or once a quarter, you're managing their expectations, they're managing you, they coming prepared. So there's a reason why these billionaires are billionaires, because they've got skills. It's not luck. And he is a great man, and he built a great business with tools similar to this. But the managing the expectations was one of the greatest experiences of my life.
Wow, that's a great lesson. Managing expectations. So much of the time we think about, all of the things we have to execute in projects, and then you could have a successful project and finish on time and on budget, but if the expectation gap is there, then you've got a problem. So you're working for AD Winston, and then you go out on your own. What was that transition like, and how did you negotiate that?
So it's a great question. So Charlie and Arthur, the two managing partners at the time, were risk-averse people. They loved what they did. They were very, very good at what they do. And I had bigger dreams. I wanted to grow the company. When I had started, the company was about 5. When I left, it was probably closer to 50. And I wanted to grow a service department. And to me, I like to grow things. I had a plan. I was a strategy process guy. And I think that made them very uncomfortable. And
Really?
yeah, I think it did.
Why?
And well, they had offered to make me a partner, Ravi. I was a young pup, and then they reneged on it. And the world I came from, which I still come from, which is this high integrity world, is, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube once you've broken a trust. So I said, I'm leaving. I'm out. I'm giving you 2 weeks notice. I'm going to start my own business. I'm going to start a service company. Didn't know anything about service because I only run a service department for about 6 months. They said, no, if you leave, you're going to put us out of business. And so I said, I'll tell you what, I'll give you a year's notice, but I take all your service customers and I'm going to start a service company and we will live happily ever after. So I gave them a year's notice, cleaned up a lot of their projects, trained some of their people. And then the year later, 1989, I launched Donnelly Mechanical, which was basically a commissioning type service company. So we were not just fixing ice machines and stuff like that. We were going into buildings very
No one
similar.
knew what commissioning was. It wasn't even a word back then.
It's funny when we were back then, Chet Vogel, who's still alive, was running Cal and Lemelson. And we were doing a lot of work for Chet, and Chet had the first commissioning engineer, ex-Honeywell BMS whiz. And I would have to demonstrate to George Hersman, who was tough. I mean, tough. And I'd have to show him how everything worked, to show him how the economizer works, show him where the valves are. I'd have to do the whole thing. And if you failed, that was $1,000. Every time he came to the site that you weren't ready, that was $1,000. And
Wow.
so you learned very early on how to get things working right. And I value those days. I still remember Chet Vogel's red pencil notes on my shop drawings, on my punch list. Everything was handwritten back then. Everything was
That's
handwritten back then.
that's awesome.
It was such an amazing time. So that's how I got started. I realized that I wanted to be the guy that didn't necessarily fix a unit, although I had to. I would come in and assess the building, take a look at the flows, take a look at the
You're
airflow,
looking at the whole system at that point,
look at the
right?
whole system. And there were very few service companies back then. There was back then in 1989, you probably had less service companies, but the service companies were huge. And so I just came in doing something very different than what they did. And then I started growing it. And then Les loved the fact, how my personality fit with his is that he's building, 1,000 stores a year. So I would go in, do the commissioning on those stores, make sure they were up and running, then take those stores under contract. And if there was a problem with the stores, I would negotiate with the builder or with the subcontractors for less. And it was a great experience. So we went from that experience. Then we did the same thing for his buddy, Mickey Drexler, over at the Gap. And then we started doing all of this for retail. So we would come in probably 3/4 through. Sometimes they'd ask me to do the balancing, but most often we would just come in, work with the engineer, because they always had the same engineer. And we would do basically a commissioning punch list and then turn it over to the store.
Wow. And that's so you had 30 trucks, you're driving around, you're working probably insane hours, and you're building a whole new business, and you're very young at the time. So you're probably learning as you go, right?
So the great thing about the service business back then, so we're talking the Mad Men generation, right? So
Mm.
this is 1989, 1990. The service department, as it presently exists today, did not exist in its same form. So you had guys out there that fixed refrigeration machines, right? I wanted nothing to do with refrigeration. I wanted those guys who could take care of refrigeration. And then you had guys that did air-cooled units. But there were very few guys out there that were sophisticated enough to do boiler plants and chiller plants and cooling towers and piping systems. And back then, the big bug was, we were having microbiological corrosion in the city. All the water treatment had gotten rid of chromates and they were into these different systems, and piping was failing. And it was a great opportunity for what I called a technical service group, and then after I started, there was a bunch of other great service companies that started, but now the service business is very, very different. And I'd say by the time I left, when I sold the company in 2018, we had upwards of about 85 service vehicles. And I don't even know how they get through the city these days with all the outdoor dining and the traffic and everything else like that. But we made it work until 2018, and now it was a great run.
Wow. And along the way, you built this great business, and then you sold the business, right?
Yes.
And what was that like? And was that difficult, or did you have to get outside help to do that? And how did you figure out, that you wanted to sell it? And what was that transition like?
Great question, Ravi. So another thing that I was taught very early on was to ask for help, but ask for help in such a way that you do it strategically. So I had gone through a divorce. My ex-wife was my partner, and it was a very emotional time for me. And I just I didn't feel the same way about the business as I did prior to the divorce. So what I ended up doing was I always had a 5-year strategic plan for every part of my life, still do to this day. And I took that 5-year strategic plan and I created an exit for me when I turned 60. And I said, listen, when I turn 60, I'm going to sell this business These are the steps I need to do. Now I need to go out and find help. So, the biggest part of any problem is naming it. And for me, naming the exit. And I probably, for the first year, I interviewed probably 20 people, asking them how they did it. I went to other business owners. I went to people that had already sold. I was involved with Vistage, which was a top-notch organization. I got a chance to see some of those guys sell. I got a chance to talk to Tiger 21 guys, brilliant, brilliant guys. So I had a lot of opportunities, and I picked my deal team. And my deal team at that time was probably 6 people. I had brought in a new accountant. I had brought in an investment banker. I brought in someone that was a technology person, because I had basically changed Donnelly from an HVAC service company to an energy service company that focused on technology. So we had to do a lot of different things. So my deal team was probably 6 people. And along the way, we kissed a lot of frogs, but finally, ENGIE, a French multinational, was very interested. They had worked with me when I had created Donnelly Sustainable Energy Services, and we sat in a lot of panels, so we got a chance to know each other. And they bought us. And I will say to you, it was when I look back at it, it was probably the most nerve-wracking 6 months of my life, because I had never done it before. And there's no one, it's exhilarating, but everything hinges on one conversation or one financial statement of one financial report. But we got through it. It was an amazing experience. They were an amazing buyer. They made the process very easy. I had used a couple of consultants. They grabbed me along the way. But I would say to you, the biggest thing that I did, and I do this to this day, is I built teams very effectively. So if I know that I don't know the answers, I'll either go get a license for it, I'll go get a certification for it, and then I'll build people around it and give it away. So it's not like I own the idea. I own the process, but I don't own the idea. And building these teams was what I realized I did best. So after I sold Donnelly, people said to me, "Oh God, Dan, what are you going to do now?" And I realized that even though I was an operator for 42 years between Winston and Donnelly, what I really liked doing was growing businesses, really taking the 5-year strategic process and fixing this and fixing that and moving this guy around, firing this guy, hiring this guy, and then growing it. And I've been very lucky, Ravi. I've had 6 different exits in the last 5 years. And
Wow.
I'm hoping I'm going to have 6 more in the next 5 years. And to me, the fascinating thing about that is that I love seeing people grow. I love seeing people that are open to growth, open to feedback, will make changes. So my favorite line in the world, and I've been saying this forever, is you have a choice in life. You can either be right or rich, but you can't be both. And if you want to be right, you're never going to be rich. And the people that keep believing that they're doing the right thing, they're working hard, but they're not getting where they are, it's because their belief system has enabled them that they're doing
They can't let
something.
go.
They
They can't
can't
let
let go.
go.
You got to let
They
go.
can't let go of this. And I work, I've had the good fortune, thanks to our mutual friend John, that I've gotten to teach for many years now. And I tell the students, at Fordham, I tell my students that don't fall in love with your own ideas. Be open to new ideas. Isn't that what learning is about, right? And I have met so many people in my life that just are adamant about being right, or the ego gets in the way. And as you and I know, ego is the great destroyer of project value, you know. And I've worked for a couple of developers and learned a lot from them. And one of the lessons I learned was that when you hold on to your ideas, to the just above even making money, above being successful, then you have a limited mindset. I think
Right.
that's what it is, and it's interesting talking about developers. So from a mechanical point of view, I used to work for a great developer, Bob Gladstone, and he said that, let me tell you something, Ravi. He said, when it comes to mechanical, I don't want to see it, I don't want to smell it, I don't want to hear it. And one time we were walking the job and we were having problems with a noisy system at a hotel that we were building. And he lost his cool and he was yelling and screaming at the MEP engineer for the contractor. And he told him the same thing. He said, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to smell it. I don't want to see it. It's got to be invisible. And so that is another challenge when you're building mechanical systems, especially as you migrated from your mechanical systems and obviously working with steam fitters and then moving into the energy side. Again, it's something that people want. It better work every time. And when it doesn't, it's a problem.
Yes. Yes. I will say to you, one of the things I love doing most, and Donnelly Mechanical did a lot of it, was I had a great relationship with John Tishman. And I was too small at the time to be doing work directly for Tishman. But when something went wrong, John Tishman, who is a master people person, would call me and said, hey, Dan, I got good news and bad news for you. Good news is I'm introducing you to a client. The bad news is you're not getting paid for it. But if you do a really good job, I'll get you the service contract at the end.
Nice.
So this is what John did. This is why he was a genius. Client is pissed at his contractor. He's building a building. Client is super pissed at his contractor. So the Tishman staff said, hey, listen, we're going to do you a favor. We're going to bring in an expert, Dan Donnelly, who's going to come in, assess it, and then give you a direct report on what's going on. Client says, okay, thank you. So I come in, I assess it, found out that they reversed the chilled water lines, and all that had to be done is they had to reverse the chilled water lines and then flush it out, and then we could get the system up and running. And client is ecstatic. Client is ecstatic. He says, Dan, I'd like you to stay on. We'll give you the maintenance contract at the end. Can you make sure they do the right job? Goes back to John Tishman and Dan Spiegel, both legends, and say, listen, this guy is really, really good. He's been with me since the beginning. He's staying here. You're paying him, blah, 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 blah. Okay, fast forward. When you look at this thing from 10,000 feet, all Tishman did was bring me in to fix their problem.
Yeah.
It's absolutely hysterical. But he did that. I would say I probably did 24 of those for John. All great clients, some situations were harder than others. So Donnelly built a reputation of, we'll go in, you give us the worst project you got, we'll go in, we'll assess it. Either myself or one of my commissioning engineers would go in, we'd assess it, write a report, give the report to you. If you want to fix it, you fix it. If you don't want to fix it, you can hire us to fix it, but we want to get paid. We don't want to get caught in the construction process. And that was a huge source of business for us. And that's really what got us into the energy side, because we were finding back then, this is right before the financial crisis, that these jobs were getting built and they were putting in the chiller plants and the boiler plants, but none of these controls were working. This is before commissioning was a law, but none of these systems worked. So what we would do is we'd go in and fix the system, get it working the way it was supposed to, and then turn it over to the client. There was so much business in that because the engineers didn't have time to go in and test the equipment. They were doing,
and the engineers are, they didn't really get involved with that physical commissioning and troubleshooting side of it. And when you're working on big projects in the city, and you've got a client that they can't get their HVAC controls to work, and the controls is tied to the BMS system, and that's tied to the fire alarm system, and it's spaghetti. And you could bring in the best mechanical engineers with PhDs, and they're not going to be able to figure it out. You've got to go in point by point, and it's actually a pain in the ass, but it's a lot of work to do that.
So Ravi, I got to tell you a funny story, and this is hysterical. But this is a story that happened over and over again. It still happens today. So we are brought in to a large hospital. And the hospital administrator is irate because nothing works. So I go downstairs and I meet the guy, the chief engineer, and I said, tell me, oh wise master, what what are your ills? What's the situation? He says, Dan, I got here 10 years ago, and this place has been running the way it's been running for 10 years. So I go in, they have a BMS. This is back then, it was a hybrid control system, pneumatic electric, right? That predated the BMS systems, and everything was disconnected. So basically, this hospital was running
God.
as an on-off. No, this is hysterical. So the hospital administrator says to me, he says, what do I do? And I said, listen, we can fix it. But if you want me to fix it, I'm going to have to train your staff on how to use this. Otherwise, a guy with a high school education is going to come in, disconnect everything, and run it on off so he doesn't get any more complaints. So the big thing, it was insane. And this is why commissioning really took off, because people used to spend the best engineers and the best architects and the best mechanical contractors and the best electrical contractors, the best builder, the best everything. And then they'd bring in a guy with a high school education, doesn't know how to use any of this stuff. He'd call me and say, listen, I'm just going to run it wild. That way nobody calls me with service complaints.
Wow.
It was insane. So there was so much business like that for us. So we realized that we could serve the client, and then we would train these people. We would train them how to do it as part of our maintenance contract. And then this is back now in 2004, I was making energy changes. I was doing free cooling. I was doing heat recovery. We were doing all of these wild things back then. So when I could see the handwriting on the wall coming in 2006 that I thought the stock market was going to go, we created an energy group. And that energy group was what got me through the financial crisis in 2008.
That was a rough time. Yeah.
It was brutal, but for us, it was a great time, because while everybody else couldn't sell projects, I could sell services.
Right.
I could say, hey, listen, I'll go in, I'll do a free assessment of your building. I'll give you, a list of 20 ECMs, and you can decide what you want to do. And if you do it, I'll support, and this is what it looks like. And during that 3 years, I would say that 2008 to 2012, 13, we were doing energy projects. And then I would say toward the tail end of that, we started doing, chiller conversions and boiler conversions, all attached to energy savings. This is before anybody did this. And now all the ESCOs are in that game, all the performance.
So energy. So once you save money on any property, it goes right. Your operating expenses go down. Your net operating income goes up, and your property is valued higher. Right. It's really connect the dots. Right. It's very straightforward. And you were able to sort of transition your businesses as you saw the market change, and working with young people, young engineers, and young construction professionals. Today, a lot more complex, a lot of opportunities out there. And what we try to tell young people is that be open to experience, get experience, go there in the field. Construction is not a remote business. You got to go out there. You got to go out there and see what's going on in the field. And I think there's a lot of opportunity. What message would you have for young people who want to go into construction?
So here would be my message, and it's the message, you have the opportunity to reinvent. So with me, we were a good contractor, but I didn't want to compete with everybody. So the only way that I could identify myself was to go out and get a new license or a new certification or create something that my competition didn't have. We did 3 things that I thought were very cool. One was the energy thing. We were the only energy service company in New York at that time. EMCOR was slowly coming into it, but they were so big that they were a battleship and I was a speedboat.
Right. You could turn faster than them. Yeah.
Exactly. So I would say to my clients, hey, listen, anybody can do a service contract, but I can do an energy service contract and save you money. And that was a huge, huge, huge opportunity for us. The second thing, and how that happened, Ravi, how that happened was we just didn't wake up one day and say, we're going to create an energy service company. 5 years before, we had said, what could we do to differentiate ourselves from our competition. What skills would I currently need to do this? What support or resources would I require to launch such an initiative? And so over 5 years, I created it, brought in a team, had them run separate. The second thing that we did, which is, I think, the coolest thing that I ever did, is my nephew is a whiz. He now is an estimator at JDP Mechanical, but he was one of my very interesting guys at Donnelly Mechanical, and he was a special projects guy. So what we decided we were going to do, and we were offering this as a resource to our clients. I would get called 10, 20 times a week. Hey, Dan, we need a budget on a medical center, a data center, blah, 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 blah. And it would take me, because I did all the budgets, it would take me probably 80% of my time. So what we ended up doing is we ended up going out to Quote Express and putting in a new estimating system. And basically for 3 years, Ravi, we took all our regular estimates, jobs we completed, anything we could do, and then we compared it against our new database. And then we were able to create cost per square foot on air-cooled, water-cooled, condenser water. We were able to do all these different types of systems, chilled water, VAV. And then so if a customer called me and they said, hey, listen, Dan, we got a 40-story building going up and it's going to be this, this, and this. All I had to do is plug and play. We were able to do a budget for them in 3 hours. Now,
Wow.
the budget
Wow.
would change and it would be qualified, but it was based on 3 years of going back and forth over 20 years of projects.
You had real data that you were working with, right?
Real data. And this is before anybody was doing this.
Yeah.
And then I sold the company, and I should have taken that with me because I don't think anybody would ever use it again. But now the big guys are all using data. Like if you see, they can do budgets based on all of their costs because that's where AI is going to take them. But it was a really cool thing because my nephew and I got a chance to do manual takeoffs versus digitizer takeoffs versus we would take a piping guy's price versus our price. It was very, very cool. The biggest thing I would say to people out there is don't be equal. Have a skill that no one else has. If you are a project manager, then read about project management or advanced project management or estimating or commissioning. Be an expert in your field. The greatest gift in the world to anybody can read. And when people tell me that they don't read, I read 3 books a week and I got the time to read it. When people tell me, oh, I don't have time to read. Well, you do have time to read because Amazon Audible is the greatest gift in the world.
Oh, that's my favorite thing.
Right? So
you're driving, you're listening to books.
You're listening to books. You can do podcasts, but the kids that do really well, in my opinion, are the ones that can raise their hand and ask for help, but they're also continuing their education, whatever that looks like. They have mentors. They have mentors that are pushing them. They have goals. And again, I can't stress enough, I believe every person should have a 5-year strategic plan. You don't get in your car and just drive. You go with a destination in mind. It's the same thing with a strategic plan.
I love that. I love this. I'm telling you, I wrote that down because I'm like 5-year strategic plan, and you know, you could have 10 things you want to accomplish, and if you write it down, maybe you'll do 8 of them, but you have to write it down.
You've got to write it down, and then those 5 or 10 things have 20 or 30 or 100 items to get you to the promised land. That's why it takes 5 years. So when people say to me, Dan, how do you do it? How do you do it? I would say, listen, I'm a student of the Benjamin Franklin balance sheet, man. You open up a journal and you close up a journal. You start a day and you close a day. I love lists and 5-year strategic plans go hand in hand.
Wow, that's some great takeaways for all of us. You know, just keep reinventing yourself, keep learning, keep reading. There's this great author out there, and I'm really hooked on him. Is Walter Isaacson.
I love Walter Isaacson.
So I tell you, 10 years ago, he published the biography of Stephen Jobs.
Yeah, love it.
Great, and that was a big read. Like, you know, that was like over, I don't know, 600-800 pages. And now he's got the story of Elon Musk. That was a great book too.
Yep.
and Da Vinci, and this guy. So Walter Isaacson is just one of those people that knows how to narrate the story of the life of great people,
Yep.
you know. And when you read that, it's so inspiring to see that, you know, nobody can stop you from learning. I saw a great quote a few months ago that if you want something from the universe, you know, it's hard because you can't take things without earning it, right? Otherwise you'll be in a battle all the time. But nothing stops you from giving away things. And one thing I've learned is if you give away your time and your knowledge and help somebody or mentor them, the universe will not stop you.
No, it'll reward you.
It will reward you. And to that extent, I'd say that we are very fortunate to have been rewarded by your wisdom and knowledge. And I want to thank you for sharing it, and want to see you continue to do your 5-year plans and continue to build great businesses, and I think more importantly, like, grow people, right? I think that's really inspiring. Growing people, what could be a better way to, to make an imprint on this world? So thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Ravi, thank you.